Spurs make a pair of trades right ahead of the NBA trade deadline. Let's talk about it.
You are Locked On Spurs, your daily San Antonio Spurs podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to Locked On Spurs, right here on the Locked On NBA Network. I'm your host, Jeff Garcia, Spurs writer for 10-5 San Antonio. Glad to have you back. Happy end of NBA trade deadline day 2023. And your Spurs made a pair of deals that just goes to show you they're all about the rebuild. Hey, thanks for making Locked On Spurs your first listen each and every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Check out FanDuel.com. Make every moment count over at FanDuel. And check that out at FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Let's go to bring in our guest who's going to help me break down the pair of deals that Spurs made today. He is my colleague at Ken's 5, Tom Petrini. Tom, pair of trades Spurs made. There's been a flurry of them, but if there is an underlying thread to the true trades, which we'll get into, is they are just all about the rebuild.
Absolutely. I don't know about you, man. I'm out of breath. That was a lot at the deadline. You know, Spurs made a couple of moves. They were somewhat expected. But I mean, you know, Westbrook, Durant, Kyrie, going on.
Okay.
And about $1 billion second-round picks.
Right. Okay, now I get it. Okay, now, before Tom and I hit record on the show, he asked me, like, how are you doing? I said, I'm fine. He was like, you're fine. It was a lot. But my mind is so trained on just silver and black. So the way I conceptualized it, Tom, was like, no, those Spurs only made 2 trades. But yes, you're absolutely right. NBA-wide, it was crazy. From Durant to what the Pelicans did with the Spurs. We'll talk about that in a minute. Just everybody was making deals. But you're here to talk about silver and black. And yeah, let's get into it. But before we do that, make sure to follow Tom on Twitter at @RealTomPetrini. Make sure you do that right now. So Tom, let's start off with the one that really got things going for San Antonio. It was the Jakob Poeltl Toronto trade. And I gotta tell you, I was not shocked. I was not surprised. I think the writing was on the wall, perhaps since the offseason. Until when it happened, because if you follow the timeline, Jakob Poeltl pretty much put the Spurs on notice in the offseason when he spoke to Austrian reporters that he is aware that he was going to be a free agent and that he was willing to explore his options. So the Spurs were able to flip him. So not too much surprise, but go ahead and break it down. What did the Spurs get in that Toronto deal?
Yeah, and honestly, I think the Spurs might have maybe not put Poeltl on notice, but put the writing on the wall when they traded DeJounte Murray in the offseason.
Yeah, exactly.
Leaving Jakob Poeltl as somehow the longest tenured Spur on this team, title that now belongs to Keldon Johnson, who also came over in the Kawhi Leonard trade, which is crazy to think about. But yeah, so Jakob Poeltl heading to the team that drafted him. They needed a center bad. And the Spurs will be getting back a lightly protected first-round pick in 2024, top 6 protected. So as long as the Raptors don't completely collapse and wind up with a top 6 pick, Spurs are getting that in 2024. If that somehow does happen, then the same protections, then it becomes a 2025 pick. If it's top 6 then it becomes a 2026 top 6 protected pick. And also 2 second-round picks and Kem Birch. Birch hasn't played for the Raptors this calendar year, 30 years old, potentially a buyout candidate there. But, I mean, like we've been saying, writing was on the wall with this one. Spurs are rebuilding. Poeltl is a talented player who can help a team looking to make a push. There was a lot of reported interest around the league for him, and Spurs make this deal and continue to add to their treasure trove of draft picks. And when Woj tweeted it out, he was like, they're not done, probably.
Right.
And he was right about that.
Yeah, we didn't even need him to tweet that out. I think collectively, the Spurs fan base knew what it was going to be this season, especially at this time of the year, the NBA trade deadline. Yeah, the Poeltl deal, as mentioned, nobody should be shocked by this. He's going to the East now. he has a lot of praise from a new Eastern Conference foe, Joel Embiid. A couple seasons ago, he called Poeltl the most underrated center in the NBA. And he goes back to a team that, as you mentioned, needs a center. And I think that he is entering his prime years. I think there was a report, I don't know if you got this on Kens5.com/Spurs, Tom, but that he was given an option of what team he wanted to go to, and Toronto was high on his list. So, yeah, good deal. But now that he's no longer a Spur, let's just focus on what the Spurs got. You mentioned the picks. I like the lightly protected. I don't think the Spurs were ever going to get the reported asking price of 2 first-rounders for him. I think that was really shooting for the moon. But again, adding to the treasure trove of picks, but it feels like Spurs fans are kind of lukewarm on it.
Yeah, I saw some people saying, like, they were asking for two firsts and they only got one. They folded, they lost this trade. And my question for those people is, have you ever sold anything on Facebook Marketplace?
Yeah.
You set your asking price high, you get as close
You're
as you
never
can
gonna
to
get
it.
Yeah.
And if you have no use for that thing, you take what you can get. And obviously Jakob Poeltl, dirty work specialist, steady production, veteran leader on this team, did a lot of things that helped him on the court and off. Pop before the season compared his leadership example on this team to that of Tim Duncan when they were winning championships. Obviously very different situations. But you look at the context, and Poeltl was on an expiring deal. The Spurs have known for a while that they weren't going to be winning anything serious this year, next year, year after that, probably. And at the end of the day, I mean, this just is the latest Spurs player who's talented and beloved and traded for a package centered around draft picks.
And look, he goes to a team that can't get the playoffs in the East. He goes to a situation where his prime years are probably not going to be wasted. I mean, they're definitely going to be wasted as San Antonio if he stayed on for the long haul. So he has a legit shot at making the postseason and perhaps moving forward, depending on what Toronto does. For the Spurs, though, and we're definitely going to hit that more on the second trade they made, but there's tearing the house down, and then there's tearing the house down, uprooting the foundation, gutting the rebar that was sitting in the foundation cement. I mean, that is what they're focused on. Keldon Johnson is now the longest tenure Spur at 20 from 2019 to present. So yeah, this is a youth movement.
Yeah, this isn't like a fixer-upper rebuild.
This is from the studs.
Yeah, this is a knockdown and build a whole new house almost kind of deal.
Yeah,
and that's been what it really set in motion years ago by Kawhi Leonard forcing his way out. And on that topic, I've just been looking at the trades that the Spurs have made over the years. So that Kawhi trade brought back DeMar DeRozan, Jakob Poeltl, and a pick that turned into Keldon Johnson, right? Flipped DeMar DeRozan in a sign and trade for picks and Thad Young, who they then flipped for a pick. Jakob Poeltl now traded for picks. If you look at it in totality, the Spurs basically lost Kawhi Leonard, Danny Green, Derek White, DeJounte Murray, and a couple of role players like Bryn Forbes, Drew Eubanks, Jock Landale. And now what they're left with is Keldon Johnson, Malachi Branham, Blake Wesley, Romeo Langford, Devontae Graham, 2023 Hornets first rounder protected, 2024 Raptors first rounder, 25 Hawks first, 25 Bulls first, 26 Hawks pick swap in the first round, 27 Hawks first, 2028 Celtics first round pick swap, and 10 second round picks. And
as a whole,
yeah, I mean, if you're in the situation that the Spurs were basically thrust into by the Kawhi trade, um, that's you can argue that they should have been tearing things down sooner.
Right.
But they have definitely committed to it
Hmm.
at this point,
Yeah.
and they've been sort of slowly building that treasure trove of future picks,
Right.
which is vital if you're a team in a small market that isn't winning anything. Spurs
Right.
have not won a playoff series since the Kawhi trade,
Right.
and I mean, GM Brian Wright clearly has a plan, clearly has had a plan for a while, and just continues to execute that. Obviously, we still have to see what those picks turn into,
Exactly.
but when you're building for the future, need as much building material as you can get, and
Hmm.
that comes in the form of future picks.
Yeah. Yeah. The Spurs are positioning themselves with this deal involving Porto and the Raptors, and including the second deal for the future. And that may be a little bit more patience from the Spurs fan base. We're talking with Tom Petrini, my colleague at Kens5.com. Follow him on Twitter at Real Tom Petrini. When we get back, we're going to dive into the second trade the Spurs made and talk about that. You could pretty much rinse and repeat this first segment. That's basically what it's going to come down to. But we'll talk about it nonetheless, and then look at what it means overall for the future and much, much more right here on Locked On Spurs. But before we do that, I want to talk about FanDuel. FanDuel is the newest partner right here and the Locked On Network. They're number one sports book in America. They are FanDuel. If you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. They have so many great features that make betting on sports fun and easy. Download FanDuel right now. Go and get yourself the no sweat first bet. So what is that? Yeah, you bet on Super Bowl 57 with a no sweat first bet. You'll get up to $3,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. FanDuel lets you bet on everything from the money line to point spreads to who will score the first touchdown. FanDuel Sportsbook app is safe, secure, super easy to use. Best of all, you get paid your winnings instantly. Can't stress that enough. Instantly. Join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/lockedon to claim your first no sweat first bet on Super Bowl 57. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment count with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
Autobots, roll out!
We're back right here on Locked On Spurs with Tom Petrini. Follow him on Twitter at Real Tom Petrini. He is my colleague over at Kens5.com. Check out Kens5.com/Spurs right now to get all the trade details that Tom put together for us ahead of this show. So the second deal the Spurs made, Tom, as I mentioned right at the break, you could pretty much rinse and repeat the first segment. It's Josh Richardson is going to New Orleans, and you mentioned too for with the Devontae Graham and 4 second-round picks. Rinse, repeat, another example of where this team is heading.
Yep, and I mean, Richardson, you guys will remember, came over in the Derek White trade at the deadline last year. So if you go back to that, Spurs were basically able to turn Derek White into Romeo Langford, Blake Wesley, Devontae Graham, who is an interesting player to me.
Yes,
Hasn't
yes, it
played
is.
much.
Yeah.
Hasn't played much for the Pelicans this year, but I mean, his second year in the league, averaging 18 and 7.5 assists a game. He's got some talent, and he'll have more opportunity on this Spurs team. 2 more years on his contract. If the Spurs want to move on from him, they should be able to do it pretty cheaply. But yeah, him, 2028 first round pick swap with the Celtics and 4 second rounders from the Pelicans. Second rounders, we saw him getting tossed around a lot at the deadline by different teams acquiring different players. I know that Spurs fans and a lot of basketball fans see a second round pick, don't get very excited.
They should.
But I mean, one, Spurs have gotten a couple of good second round picks over the years. Not saying everybody's going to turn into Manu Ginobili, but Trey Jones was a second round pick. And as we saw today, those second round picks can be used in a lot of other moves. So,
Absolutely, yeah.
just about adding to the war chest. And I
Mm-hmm.
mean, Josh Richardson, great veteran presence. He'd been in the playoffs every year before he came to the Spurs. So he's going to add some value to the Pelicans there. Some much needed shooting. And yeah, I mean, like we've been saying, it's just
Mm-hmm.
the Spurs are in asset
Right.
acquisition mode.
Yeah,
And
and I get and I think, and I'm glad you brought that acquisition mode right now, because again, as nobody should be surprised that Richardson is traded, nor should anybody be surprised Poeltl is traded, and nobody should be surprised that this is the goal for this team when making deals. You mentioned it before. What did they acquire in the Bryn Forbes deal with Denver? Second round pick. What did they acquire in the deal with Thad Young? First round pick. Drew Eubanks picks. Derek White picks. I mean, you get the pattern here, everybody. This is likely going to be the norm until they're ready to strike. Now, just because they got this war chest of picks doesn't mean they have to use them in a draft situation, Tom. They can use these as a valuable pieces to perhaps a major deal down the road, whether that be acquiring an all-star to pair with a Wembanyama if they win it, the
Yep.
draft lottery, or Scoot Henderson if they win if they come in a second. The point is Spurs fans should not get fixated on like, oh, just more picks. Think of it as just as I mentioned on Twitter and Tom mentioned right now, a war chest. It's just ammunition to
Yep.
make a move. They're not going to use them all on picks. They're going to flip some of these. Nobody should be surprised about that. They're going
gives
to
them
use these. Yeah.
It gives them flexibility, because like you said, the Spurs of all of those picks, most valuable is probably their own pick this coming year
Mm-hmm.
when
Yep.
they're looking at a bottom 3 record, which means they're looking at the best possible odds at getting the top pick or the second pick or the third pick.
Mhm.
And any of those picks, it's not just Wembanyama in this draft. Scoot Henderson, fantastic, potentially franchise altering player.
Right.
Amon Thompson, wonderful. And there are a lot of there are a couple of other guys at the top of this draft where even if the Spurs slide down the board, they could be getting
Mhm.
the type of player that you want to build around. And Greg Popovich will tell you, key to his success was drafting Tim Duncan and then playing Tim Duncan.
Right.
If the Spurs want to get back to competing for titles, which of course they do eventually, this is probably the path that makes the most sense, and definitely the path that they have chosen. And if they do land Wembanyama or Scoot, and start to really improve from, I mean, they've won a quarter of their games this year-ish. So improvement seems likely just because it'd be hard to,
You're right.
hard to go much further down.
Well,
and you're adding talent. So
right.
if they may find themselves in a position where it's like, hey, yeah, let's flip some of these picks for a guy who can help us build around these young players and get us going.
And this war chest may buck the trend, the historic trend for San Antonio of this team not landing big free agents, whether it be in free agency or just a sign and trade situation. Everybody knows that LMA, LaMarcus, is the only big name free agent to ever come to San Antonio and decide to come to San Antonio. Now, look, but who was he coming to? It was Kawhi, it was Timmy still. Granted, the big three were on their last legs, but they were still here. So you use these picks to perhaps create a team that could attract big name free agents. And, you got to think of it like that, Spurs fans. And guess what? This is what a rebuild looks like. This is it. You're in the thick of things right now. And guess what? This may even continue through next season. This might happen. Look at Houston. Look at Detroit. Look at Orlando, Tom. They're just barely starting to come out of it now. But what did it take for them to get a number 1 pick or a top pick, Pablo Banchero? So this is going to take some time. Now, obviously, you accelerate things if Scoot or Wemby's wearing a Spurs uniform next year, that'd be awesome. That really accelerates the rebuild. But if it doesn't, they'll be primed in that situation. Tom, your thoughts?
Yeah. I think that, and kind of a knock-on effect of trading experienced veterans like Poeltl and Richardson is making it harder for this team to win games. So making it more likely that they'll get one of those top picks.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, basically, this is the Spurs a while ago kind of accepted where they were at in the league. And so whether
and I'm glad you brought that up. I always repeat this on Locked On Spurs, and it bears repeating now. Go back on kensfi.com/Spurs. Look at the article I posted where Brian Wright all but said the T word with SiriusXM NBA radio. It's right there in black and white, Tom. I mean, he just danced around the T word. Instead of calling it a tank, he was calling it like prank or something. They knew the assignment. He knew it from the beginning this offseason. And it was right after, it was coming off the heels of the DeJounte Murray trade. In an interview, the interviewer asked him, like, okay, so why did you do it? And then without saying tank, he was like, well, certain things have to happen in order to position this franchise into a very good spot in the next offseason, which he's meaning this coming offseason. So the offseason is all about the lottery and the draft. So he kind of said it without saying it. Hey, once again, we're here with Tom Petrini from kens5.com. Follow him on Twitter at RealTomPetrini. When we get back, I'm going to ask Tom a couple of other questions. One player that's still on the roster that I find a little surprising, or maybe not. We'll talk about that and much, much more. And, of course, give our grades for these two deals by your San Antonio Spurs. We're back right here on Locked On Spurs with Tom Petrini. Follow him on Twitter at RealTomPetrini. Check out kensfi.com/Spurs. Tom has both trade deals. Josh Richardson, Jakob Poeltl broke it down for you. Go check it out. Tom, are you a little surprised that Doug McDermott is still a Spur? At least as of this recording, who knows? Maybe they filed paperwork and they haven't announced it yet. But as of right now, he's still a Spur.
It doesn't shock me. If they were going to trade another player, he was the most likely. To me and everybody else paying attention. Another veteran sharpshooter, contending teams value that. But he has another season left on his contract. Richardson and Poeltl were both expiring. And you do need a veteran presence in the locker room when you have a group of young players like this, guys to help the young guys learn. Provide an example. And McDermott has expressed interest in staying here and being part of that. But also, 365 days from now, we could be saying the exact same thing that we've said about Poeltl and Richardson, about McDermott. So it doesn't shock me that he's still here. But he was definitely one of the players, like, I think in terms of most tradable assets that the Spurs had at this deadline, it was Poeltl, then Richardson, then McDermott. So, it's not shocking to me, and it's not really disappointing to me either. I know a lot of people would have been disappointed if Poeltl and Richardson remained on the roster with their expiring deals. And with the Spurs in position to move them for assets, which they did. But the Spurs still have that opportunity with McDermott moving forward. And like I said, you need some. You can't have a roster that's only guys who are too young to rent a car.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll be honest, I'm a little surprised that he's still here. I really thought, with the aggressiveness as Brian Wright has been showing since the Bryn Ford trade and everything else in between, DeJounte Murray perhaps being the biggest example, trading away an all-star like they did, that he would just go for broke. And all right, what's up next? Let's see what we can get for McDermott. So I really thought they were going to go that path. And then I even texted Tom before we recorded this show saying, let's just wait about 10 more minutes in case something else, like the paperwork, gets filed later. Because I was expecting the McDermott. I said, there's no way but I guess he's still here. That doesn't mean like they can't use him next year, as Tom mentioned. There's still the buyout market. Who knows if they buy him? I don't know. We don't know. But financially, Tom, the Spurs are even better in that position, right? I think they're hovering around 25 mil, something like that. Do you have those numbers?
Let me see.
I think they're about 25 mil.
Yeah,
I think that's
the problem with the Spurs making these deals is they're consequential deals for the Spurs, but like the Pearl trade dropped last night, and then 10 minutes later the Durant trade dropped. So anybody
Yeah.
who would be reporting on the protections on the pick that the Raptors were sending back,
Right.
they were all busy.
Yeah.
But the Spurs definitely still have among the most cap space in the league, and that's another thing that gives them flexibility moving forward,
Right.
because they can they probably won't be using that cap space to sign a big free agent, but they can rent it out to teams that are looking to get out of bad
You're right.
contracts. And
Look at the Miami deal. It's a perfect example.
yeah,
Yeah.
and you can look even bigger than that Miami deal, like a player who was being talked about was Duncan Robinson, who the Heat signed to a pretty ridiculous contract, and reportedly were looking to move on from at this deadline by attaching picks. Ben Simmons, Nets were reportedly willing to attach draft compensation to move on from his albatross contract. And when stuff like that happens, like you look at Russell Westbrook heading to the Utah Jazz, I don't think he's ever going to play a game in a Jazz uniform. They're going to buy out his contract and let him, pick his next team.
Walk.
And they're just going to take those picks. That's what teams in these positions do, and the Spurs retain that flexibility.
I'm gonna miss Josh Jay Rich.
Yep.
Yeah, really good guy to talk with. I had the opportunity to talk to him the moment he got traded to San Antonio in his first game against Chicago. We ended up talking more about the Super Bowl halftime of last year's 56 than we did about him getting traded. And just really good guy, fan of soccer, really good to interview, and of course on the court, really good player. I gotta ask you about Jakob though. Would you consider Jakob the second best center the Spurs ever had?
Ooh, that's a good question. And obviously there's some recency bias here.
Right.
And I
We got names like Splitter and Fabrizio and Rasho, after David. You go back before David, Artis Gilmore. So I don't know. I might put him up there.
Artis Gilmore, I'll be honest, I haven't watched too much Artis Gilmore, but I've heard the stories.
Yeah, he was just a beast in the middle. Like
he was nice.
It was like Shaq-like, not like Shaq, but very close to it, that big body bruiser.
And I guess the other thing you have to consider in this is, do we consider Tim Duncan also a center in addition to being the greatest power forward of all time?
Right.
I like when people like try to argue against Tim Duncan as the best power forward of all time and say, he spent more time at center or whatever. And I agree with those people. I'm like, you know what? Let's just agree that he's the greatest big man of all time. Sure.
There you go. I like that. Yeah.
But
all bases.
Poeltl grew into a very, very solid center for this team, anchor for the defense. Obviously, the defense this year worse than the NBA, but that's not his fault. He is, to me, he was basically Rudy Gobert. He was like 90% of Rudy Gobert at about 15% of the cost. He did so many things, from the screen assist to anchoring the defense. He became sort of a dribble handoff, passing, backdoor cut hub for this team.
It increased his assists this season too.
Yep. I mean,
Yep.
it's either this year or last year was his best season in the league. And just valuable for his production, valuable for the things that he did that didn't show up in the stat sheet. And you can talk all you want about his free throws and his lack of range, but when you're a center who does literally everything else at a high level, you want those guys on your team.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm
durable and very durable. That's
Yes.
that impressed me the most for a guy that his size and that wear and tear on his legs and his knees and the pounding he takes. Durable. I can't recall an extended period of time of him being out in the Spurs uniform, maybe 3 games. So there was that COVID incident. I'm not going to count that thing where he got COVID, but it's not just like an injury. I can't recall.
He never missed extended time.
Yeah.
And I think the most severe injury he ever got was that sunburn. You remember that?
I remember that, yeah.
And he went out there red as a lobster and was just banging, like yeah, no, I will always have love for Jakob Poeltl. Another really great guy to talk to. Just the way he sees the game, and the way he saw and understood this team this year. One thing I'm going to miss is when he would go up for like a little finger roll or whatever off the glass, and Sean Elliott would be like, "Dunk it, big man." I'm gonna miss that.
Miss that. Yep.
I agree with Sean. He'd set you 7-1, dunk the ball more, but he had beautiful touch around the rim too. Has beautiful. He still exists and is a basketball player.
Yeah.
Not going to talk about him in the past tense. And he really does bring a lot to the Raptors that they've been playing 6'9", 6'10" guys at center for much of the year. So, and you looked around the league before the trade deadline. Celtics reportedly made an offer. Didn't include first round picks. I thought the Warriors could be a good landing spot. Thought he would fit great in their offense. So, is he like a all-star level player? No, but he's the kind of guy that makes those all-star level players better. And teams are always looking for that. So he's going to be missed here by, I know, his coach, his young teammates, and fans who have grown to really appreciate what he does on the court.
It's Charles Bassey time now. Bassey's going to be, he's going to get that call up.
Absolutely. And I mean, we're going to see Zach Collins now as the starting center of the Spurs for the rest of the season, at least. And, I think about Collins. He's been playing better recently. This is really the first season where he's been healthy, like in his NBA career, basically. He's dealt with so many injuries, and now he's back. He was a high draft pick because he
10 overall, I think.
Somewhere he was a lotto pick, and because
he was a lottery pick
because he can space the floor, because he can, and he's got that grit, that sandpaper element to his game. Looks like G-Eazy with no tattoos, but he's not stepping back from any fights. He's a good player and kind of adds a dimension to the offense that Poeltl didn't with his shooting. So interested to see how that impacts spacing. Interested to see, how he's able to try to, pick up the slack in terms of doing those little things that Yak was so good at and so known for.
I can't wait till you show off your Kem Birch Spurs jersey. However short-lived he may be.
I think he's wearing 92. So yeah. That would be a fun bet.
Yeah.
If he ever plays a game for the Spurs, get a Kem Birch jersey.
That jersey is gonna be like one that you go up to somebody and say like, "Hey, that's a pretty sweet jersey." Like whoever has a Kem Birch jersey in the future, it'll be like you will be on social media. Like so, 10 years from now, Tom is gonna be wearing a Kem Birch jersey at a Spurs game.
It'll be worth more than gold.
And some young kid, like half Tom's age, is gonna take a picture for him, share it on Twitter, and be like, some guy's wearing a Kem Birch jersey. Shout out to him, Kem Birch. That's what's gonna happen.
I don't know if Twitter will still exist at that point, but if it does, absolutely.
Yeah, that's what's gonna happen. But all right, we're running out of time here, so let's give it our grades. I'm gonna give it a solid B. There's a part of me thinks that two things I already mentioned. I think they could have been aggressive in trading McDermott, but I get your point about you got to have some stable veteran on the roster. I get that. But if they're going all in, you then go all in. That was kind of my feeling. And the +2, I think you could have probably gotten a little bit more for Jakob, maybe just a little bit more. But overall, a solid B. I'm going to bump it up. I'll give it a B+. Set themselves really well for the future. War chest times 10 of draft picks. Tradable players you can still flip. You mentioned one of them next year, perhaps McDermott could be that guy. So yeah, I'm going to give it a B+. You, Tom?
I think you got it pretty much right on the mark because that's what you give someone who does exactly what's expected. And for me, for everybody who's paying attention, this is about what we expected the Spurs to do at the deadline. The big thing to reach that was simply to trade Poeltl and Richardson for future focused assets.
Right.
It matters what those assets are, but I mean, 4 picks, and honestly, Devontae Graham excites me. Maybe
I can see him fitting in the timeline. I can see him fitting. I don't see Birch long term at all.
Right.
But for sure, Graham I think could possibly fit in.
Yeah, like I was hoping the Spurs would be able to get a first round pick for Richardson, but 4 seconds and Devontae Graham, that's kind of a haul for a guy who came back in a trade last year and was on an expiring deal. So yeah, I think B+ is a pretty fair assessment of what the Spurs Brian Wright did at this deadline.
But now the Spurs are on the clock. Not right now, in the offseason and moving forward. We'll see what they'll do with that war chest of picks and these young players. Hey, we're done talking. We want to hear from you. What do you think about the Spurs at NBA trade deadline day? That's now come and gone. Well, the next thing is going to watch out is the waiver wire. We'll see what the Spurs do then. But that'll be for a whole other episode of Locked On Spurs. But we definitely need to hear from you. What did you think about the Jakob trade? What do you think about the Josh Richardson trade? Fair, not fair? Are you disappointed? Are you elated? Did you expect more? You gotta let us know right now. Tom, tell everybody how they can chat with you on social media.
At Real Tom Petrini on Twitter, as long as that site is running. A lot of fakes out there.
Did you see that leaked rumored limit now that they're gonna do now? Like 20 tweets a day or something, 200, something like that, something ridiculous.
No,
like if you're not a subscriber, like
it broke the other day, and you could only send tweets by scheduling them. And honestly, I'm gonna sue for breaking Twitter right before the NBA trade deadline. Criminal offense in my book.
Way to go, Elon. Messed up there. I don't think he's a big sports fan, so maybe he has that disconnect there. So
can you imagine if he bought a team? It'd be geniusly run, I'm sure. All right, we got
what they call the tweets. They'd be called the tweets, the such and such city tweets.
We gotta stop before I get in trouble here.
You're giving him ideas. Don't give me the bad ideas. Don't give him any more ideas. But yeah, follow me on Twitter at Jeff G Spurs Zone and subscribe to Locked On Spurs wherever you get your favorite podcast: Google Play, Stitcher, iTunes, the Kens 5 Plus app, every spot you can think of. Locked On Spurs is there right for you. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Spurs your first listen. Second listen, check out Game to Game NBA. Every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game to Game covers everything from across the NBA with analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Same thing, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, wherever you get podcasts. So for Tom Petrini, I am Jeff Garcia. We're putting a lock on this episode of Locked On Spurs.